The bustling city of Corvala was a world of contrasts. Towering mansions gleamed in the distance, their spires piercing the sky, while the alleys below whispered secrets of the poor. It was within this dichotomy that Alara stood, her figure small against the grandeur of the rich city's skyline. Though her clothes were simple, her posture was anything but. She had spent years observing, learning, and now, as the sun set, casting a golden glow over the city's skyline, she knew it was time to act. The world doesn't care for those without wealth, Alara muttered to herself, her voice a soft but determined whisper. But wisdom has power. She glanced down at her leather-bound notebook, its pages filled with meticulous observations and carefully crafted plans. Today, she would prove it. As she stepped forward into the heart of Corvala's high society, her mind was focused, but her heart pounded with anticipation. Today, the rich will learn what true power is. As Alara stepped into the grand ballroom, she could feel the weight of every eye in the room. The rich and powerful were gathered in their finest attire, their laughter echoing through the halls, but to Alara, they all seemed blind to the world beyond their gilded walls. The low murmur of conversation stopped momentarily as she walked across the polished marble floor, her footsteps echoing louder than she had anticipated. The guests stared, some in confusion, others in judgment. But Alara paid them no mind. She had prepared for this moment, studied their every move, learned their habits, and now she was here to prove that her wisdom was the key to their success, or their downfall. As she reached the center of the room, a figure stepped forward, a man dressed in rich silks, his smirk as sharp as his attire. "And who might you be?" he asked, his voice dripping with condescension. Alara met his gaze with steady eyes, a slight smile curling at the corner of her lips. "I am the one who will teach you all a lesson you've forgotten." The man, clearly amused, took a step closer to Alara, his eyes scanning her attire, the simple dress and plain shoes, in sharp contrast to the lavishness around her. "A lesson?" he repeated, his tone mocking. "And what could a girl like you teach us, the masters of this city?" Alara did not flinch. "I am not here to teach you what you think you know," she replied calmly. "I am here to show you what you've missed. Wisdom is not something you inherit, it is something you earn." The man chuckled, but there was a flicker of doubt in his eyes. "And you think you've earned it?" he asked, the sarcasm dripping from his words. "What could a poor girl from the streets possibly know about success?" Alara's gaze hardened, her voice unwavering. "I know that true power doesn't come from wealth or status. It comes from understanding, from insight into the world around you. And that is why, despite everything you have, you will never be as powerful as you think." The room fell silent, the guests watching, waiting for the next move. The man, now clearly irritated, motioned for a servant to bring forth a drink, trying to dismiss Alara with his casual arrogance. "You talk about wisdom. But wisdom doesn't win wealth," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. Alara watched him carefully, her eyes narrowing. She knew this game well. She had spent years studying the wealthy, learning their habits, their weaknesses, and their desires. "You're right," she said with a slight nod. "Wisdom doesn't win wealth, but it can make it last. You may have inherited your wealth, but without the wisdom to use it, it will slip through your fingers." The man paused, his expression faltering for the first time. Alara seized the moment. "You see, what you fail to understand is that true wealth doesn't lie in gold or jewels. It lies in knowing how to make a difference, in creating value for others. That is the kind of wealth that lasts. The kind of wealth that can change the world." Her voice was calm, but each word carried the weight of years of thought. The room was still as Alara's words sank in, the tension thick in the air. The man's lips curled into a forced smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "And what would you suggest, young lady?" he asked, his voice now tinged with a mixture of curiosity and annoyance. Alara's smile was almost imperceptible. "I would suggest that you begin to listen, not just to your own voice, but to the voices of those around you, the poor, the workers, the ones who make your wealth possible. Without them, you have nothing. She paused, her eyes scanning the room, noting the faces of those who had been quietly watching the exchange. It's time for you to see that your wealth is not just for you. It's for the future. And only by using it wisely will you ensure that future is secure. The man scoffed, but Elara could see the flicker of doubt in his eyes, the beginning of something that might change. I think it's time we see if your wisdom is as valuable as you say, he said, his voice a little less sure. The following days in Corvala were a whirlwind. Elara's words had made waves, and though the wealthy elites were initially dismissive, the ripple effect was undeniable. She had begun to gain a reputation. Whispers filled the streets. Who is she? The girl who dared challenge the rich. Despite the initial skepticism, Elara found herself invited to more gatherings, more events, each one an opportunity to further push her agenda. At a lavish dinner party hosted by one of the city's wealthiest families, Elara stood at the edge of the room, observing. The opulence surrounding her only fueled her determination. She wasn't here for idle conversation. She was here to learn, to understand their power structures, and to shift them. A voice interrupted her thoughts. Ah, the girl of the hour, came a smooth, mocking tone. Elara turned to see the man from the ballroom, his face now masked with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. I didn't expect to see you here again. Do you plan to teach us all another lesson tonight? Elara met the man's gaze with a calm, composed expression. I'm not here to teach, she said softly. I'm here to listen, to understand. His smile faltered for just a moment before he regained his composure. Listen, he repeated, clearly amused. You're a curious one, I'll give you that. But you'll find that the rich don't listen. They don't need to. Elara raised an eyebrow. That's the problem, she said. You've all stopped listening not just to the world around you but to yourselves. Power doesn't lie in silence. It lies in connection. The man scoffed, but Elara saw the flicker of curiosity in his eyes. And how would you suggest we connect then? We're beyond such things, he said, his voice dripping with disbelief. What you call connection, I call weakness. Elara's gaze didn't waver. The greatest mistake the wealthy make is thinking that power is about control. Real power comes from understanding the needs of others and using your position to elevate them. The man took a step closer, clearly intrigued, but still skeptical. You really believe that? You think that empathy and connection will turn our wealth into something greater than it already is? Elara smiled slightly. I know it will. Your wealth is a tool. If you use it correctly, you can change the world. But if you continue hoarding it, building walls around it, it will eventually collapse under its own weight. She paused, allowing the silence to fill the air before she continued. True strength lies in giving, in empowering others. That is where your legacy will be built. The man hesitated, visibly shaken by her words. And what do you suggest I do with this newfound wisdom then? He asked, his tone now more serious. Elara leaned in slightly, her voice steady and sure. Begin by listening. Start with the workers who make your wealth possible. Understand their lives, their struggles. Build something that benefits not just you, but everyone. Only then will you understand the true meaning of power. The man's face flickered with doubt, but there was something in her words that seemed to shift his perspective. He was no longer dismissive, he was thoughtful, even uncertain. That's a tall order, he muttered. And how do you expect me to change everything overnight? Elara smiled, a glint of resolve in her eyes. It's not about overnight, it's about taking the first step. Once you see the world from a different angle, things won't be the same. She turned to walk away, leaving the man in silence, his thoughts clearly occupied with her words. As Elara made her way through the mansion, she couldn't help but feel a sense of victory. But she knew this was only the beginning. The wealthy of Corvala were powerful, but they were also blind to the very forces that had built their success. She had opened their eyes, just a crack, but now she needed to show them how to use that awareness to change the world. Outside, the cool night air greeted her, and Elara paused, taking a deep breath. The city was still awake, bustling with life, but she knew the real work was about to begin. She had made an impact, but the true test would be whether or not they would take her advice to heart. One step at a time, she whispered to herself, her resolve growing stronger. One step at a time. The sound of clinking glasses filled the grand hall as Alara entered yet another lavish banquet hosted by the city's elites. The air was thick with the scent of fine wine and expensive perfumes, and the guests laughed carelessly, oblivious to the shifting tide beneath their feet. Alara's entrance was almost unnoticed at first, her simple attire and unassuming demeanor blending into the background. But as she walked through the crowd, she could feel the subtle shift in the room, the air thickening, conversations slowing as people took notice. One man, a particularly pompous figure in a fur-lined cloak, looked her up and down with a sneer. "Ah, it's you," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. "The one who thinks she can change the world with words. How charming." Alara's eyes met his, her expression calm. "I don't need to change the world with words. I need to change it with actions, and I'm just getting started." The man sneered at her words but didn't respond immediately. Instead, he took a step forward, sizing her up. "You truly believe you can teach us something, don't you?" he said, the condescension dripping from his words. Alara's lips curled into a small, confident smile. "I believe that anyone willing to listen can learn, but it's the ones who think they know everything who are truly lost." The man's eyes narrowed as he studied her, but his smirk never faltered. "And what exactly do you propose to teach us tonight then? How to be humble? How to live like peasants?" Alara's gaze never wavered. "I don't need to teach you how to live like peasants. I need to teach you how to live with purpose, to understand that real power comes from the ability to uplift others, not just yourself." The man chuckled, but there was a hint of uncertainty in his laugh. "You talk as though you understand power. You don't have a fraction of the wealth or influence we do." Alara stepped closer to him, the guests around them now beginning to take notice of the exchange. "You're right," she said, her voice low but steady. "I don't have the wealth you do, but wealth isn't power. You've confused the two. Power is the ability to create change, to influence the world in ways that go beyond money. The true wealthy are those who can shape the future. And that, my friend, is something you've yet to understand." There was a brief silence before the man spoke again, his voice now tinged with doubt. "And you think you have that power?" Alara's smile widened slightly. "I don't think it. I know it." The man scoffed, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of concern. "You'll never change the way we live, girl. We've built this empire, and no amount of talk will bring it down." Alara's expression hardened. "I'm not here to bring it down. I'm here to show you how to build it better." The man took a step back, clearly rattled. Alara had struck a nerve, but he wasn't going to give up so easily. "And how do you propose we start?" he asked, his tone now more guarded than before. Alara didn't hesitate. "Start by listening. Start by realizing that your wealth doesn't give you the right to ignore the suffering of others. Start by using your resources to lift people up, not just to hoard your power." The man's jaw clenched, but he remained silent for a moment. The guests around them were whispering now, their curiosity piqued by Alara's bold words. "You're asking for the impossible," the man said finally. "You want us to change everything, to turn the very foundation of our society upside down." Alara's eyes softened slightly. "No, I'm asking for you to take the first step. The rest will follow." The man stood silent for a long moment, his pride warring with the doubt Alara's words had seeded in him. Finally, he spoke, his tone less mocking, more contemplative. "You think that by changing how we treat the poor, we'll suddenly become better people? You think that's how power works?" Alara met his gaze, her voice calm but firm. "Yes, I do. Because the greatest wealth is not in gold. It's in the goodwill of those you've helped. And that, once earned, is more powerful than anything you could ever buy." The man hesitated, and for the first time, Alara saw a flicker of something in his eyes, uncertainty, maybe even fear. "Maybe you're right," he admitted quietly. "But it will take more than words to change this city. It will take action." Alara smiled, knowing that this was just the beginning. "Then let's start with action." The city of Corvala had begun to change. The elites, who had once dismissed Ilara as nothing more than a passing curiosity, now found themselves grappling with the consequences of her words. The wealthy families had started to listen. Some even began to implement her ideas. But not all were pleased. In the dimly lit chambers of a private meeting hall, Ilara sat across from a group of influential men and women, their faces grim and unyielding. One of the wealthiest figures, Lord Darvish, leaned forward, his fingers steepled in front of him. "You've made your mark, girl," he said coldly. "But your influence is dangerous. You stir unrest among the people. That is not how things are done in Corvala." Ilara's eyes locked with his, unblinking. "Perhaps Corvala has outgrown the old ways," she replied, her voice steady. "Perhaps it's time for change." Lord Darvish's face twisted into a scowl, and the other elites in the room exchanged wary glances. "Change? Do you have any idea what you're suggesting?" he hissed. "You're playing with fire, Ilara. These people you're so eager to help, they don't understand the consequences of your ideas." Ilara remained calm, her eyes never leaving his. "I'm not asking for blind charity. I'm asking for understanding. I'm asking for you to realize that your wealth is built on the backs of others. Until you acknowledge that nothing will truly change." The room was silent for a moment, the weight of her words hanging heavily in the air. "You think you can teach us to understand?" Darvish scoffed, his tone mocking. "You'll never change this city with your ideals." Ilara's gaze never wavered. "I'm not here to change the city overnight," she said slowly. "But you can't keep ignoring the cracks that are beginning to show. The poor are starting to see the difference between your power and their reality. And when they see the truth, they will demand change. Not from me. From you." Darvish's expression faltered, his anger simmering beneath the surface. "You think they'll rise up? The people you've been using for so long? You are deluded." Ilara's voice dropped, becoming even more pointed. "No, Lord Darvish. I think they'll rise because you've ignored them for too long." She stood, her words cutting through the room like a sharp blade. "And you've underestimated their strength." Ilara's words hung in the air, and for a brief moment, it seemed as though the weight of her argument might break through the wall of resistance. But Darvish's laugh shattered the silence, harsh and bitter. "You think you can stand alone against us? Against centuries of tradition? You'll be crushed under the weight of your own naivety." Ilara's expression hardened, her resolve unwavering. "I may be alone for now, but I am not without power. You see, power isn't just about wealth. It's about influence, and I have more influence than you think." She turned to the other elites in the room, her eyes scanning each one. "I didn't come here to destroy you. I came here to show you a better way." Darvish's eyes narrowed. "We'll see about that." As Ilara left the meeting hall, her mind raced. The resistance she had encountered wasn't unexpected, but it was more dangerous than she had anticipated. Darvish's words echoed in her mind. "You'll be crushed under the weight of your own naivety." But Ilara wasn't naive. She knew the road ahead would be difficult, but she had always believed in the power of wisdom over brute force. The city was changing, whether the elites liked it or not. As she walked through the quiet streets of Corvala, she saw the faces of the people, the workers, the laborers, the ones who had been forgotten. And in their eyes, she saw hope. "This is just the beginning," Ilara whispered to herself, her determination growing with each step. The beginning of a new era. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a golden hue over Corvala's towering mansions and bustling streets. Ilara stood on the balcony of a modest inn, looking out over the city that had once felt so distant to her. Now, it was her battleground, and the fight was far from over. Word had spread, some of the wealthy families had begun to listen, while others had chosen to resist. But resistance was not something Ilara could afford. She needed allies, those who understood the power of wisdom over wealth. As she gazed out, a figure approached from behind. It was Dorian, a young but influential member of one of Corvala's oldest merchant families. He had been a quiet ally, one who had seen the cracks in the system and wanted to change them. "You've made an impression," Dorian said, his voice low. But you're walking a dangerous path. The elites are starting to notice. Elara turned to face him, her expression steady. I knew the path wouldn't be easy, she said quietly. But the more they resist, the more they reveal their weaknesses. Dorian stepped closer, his brow furrowed with concern. But that's the problem, he said. The more they resist, the more dangerous they become. You're not just challenging their way of life, you're threatening their power, their very identity. Elara's gaze softened, her mind racing with the weight of his words. Then I'll show them that power isn't something they can hold on to forever. If they don't learn to share it, they'll lose it. Dorian studied her for a long moment. I'm with you, Elara, he said finally. But we'll need more than just words. We need a plan, a way to make them see the truth without pushing them to the point of destruction. Elara nodded slowly, her mind already working on the next step. And soul. Then we'll make them see it, one move at a time. As the night wore on, Elara and Dorian worked tirelessly, strategizing their next move. They knew they couldn't take on the elites head-on. They needed to outsmart them. Corvalla's elite had power, but they also had vulnerabilities: greed, pride, and fear. Elara's wisdom had already begun to expose those cracks, but now she needed to find a way to leverage them. We'll start with Lord Darvish, Elara said, her voice calm but sharp. He is the one who's the most vocal in his opposition to me. If we can get him on our side, we can start to turn the tide. Dorian raised an eyebrow. And how do you propose we do that? Elara smiled, a glint of mischief in her eyes. We'll make him think it's his idea. The next day, Elara found herself at one of Corvalla's grandest estates, the home of Lord Darvish. His mansion was an imposing structure, built high upon a hill, with sprawling gardens and intricate stonework that reflected his status. But Elara was not intimidated. She had come here with a purpose, and her mind was sharp. As she entered the opulent hall, Lord Darvish greeted her with a tight smile, his eyes betraying a mixture of curiosity and distrust. I see you've come to continue your crusade, Elara, he said, his voice smooth but guarded. Elara nodded, her voice calm. I've come to offer you a partnership, Lord Darvish, one that will benefit us both. He raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. A partnership? You've been speaking against us for weeks now. What could you possibly offer me? Elara stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. What if I told you that your wealth could be preserved, and even increased, by making a small change? What if I told you that the key to power is not control, but cooperation? Lord Darvish's expression faltered for a moment, the first sign of genuine interest she had seen from him. Go on, he said, his voice softer. The people you've been oppressing, they are the ones who can keep your wealth flowing. They are the ones who can create more opportunities for you, more value. But first you need to understand them. You need to hear them, to give them a voice. Lord Darvish remained silent for a long moment, his eyes narrowing as he considered her words. Finally, he spoke, his tone hesitant. And you think you can make me see that? You think you can change everything with just a few words? The grand hall was buzzing with energy. The wealthiest and most influential of Corvalla's elite gathered to discuss matters of trade, politics, and power. But beneath the surface, a silent war was unfolding. Elara, now a regular presence in these high circles, stood quietly in the corner of the room, her eyes scanning the interactions carefully. Her presence no longer seemed like an intrusion, but her silence was a weapon in itself. Lord Darvish had begun to see the merit in her ideas, slowly. But his peers were not as easily swayed. One man in particular, the powerful merchant Emery, had made it his mission to undermine her at every turn. She's nothing but a threat to everything we've built, Emery had said earlier in the day, his voice dripping with disdain. She's turned your heads with empty promises. Wisdom doesn't buy loyalty. But Elara had learned to use the tension to her advantage, and now the moment had come. As Emery's voice rang out, the room fell silent. The powerful merchant was known for his influence in the city's trade, and his words carried weight. You're playing a dangerous game, Lord Darvish, he continued, his eyes fixed on Elara. This girl might have a few clever ideas, but she will never understand the true nature of power. Elara met Emery's gaze with calm determination. I don't need to understand your version of power, she said, her voice cutting through the tension. I understand what it takes to build something that lasts. Real power comes from unity, not division. And unity comes from recognizing the value of all people, not just those who sit at your table. The guests shifted uncomfortably, murmurs rising in the air. Emery scoffed, but there was a flicker of doubt in his eyes. Emery stepped forward, his face red with frustration. You think you can convince me with your unity talk? He sneered. The world doesn't work that way. You want to change the balance of power, but you don't have the means to do it. Elara didn't flinch. You're right. I don't have the means to change everything, but I do have the means to change you. The room went still as her words hung in the air. The truth is, Emery, she continued, your wealth and power are built on the backs of those you exploit. But what happens when the people you control begin to realize their own strength? What happens when they see through the illusion of your power? Emery's eyes flickered with something, a mixture of anger and fear, but he didn't respond immediately. As Emery stood silent, Lord Darvish rose from his seat, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. Enough, both of you, he said, his tone firm but weary. We cannot afford to tear each other apart in public. Elara, you've made your point, and Emery, your objections are noted. But we must remember why we are here. We are not enemies. We are the stewards of Corvala. His words seemed to have little effect on Emery, who continued to glare at Elara. But the tension in the room began to subside, and Elara could sense the shift in the air. Lord Darvish had just shown a willingness to stand between her and Emery's opposition. That, in itself, was a victory. I've heard your ideas, Darvish said, turning to Elara. And I'm willing to give them a chance, but the real test will be how you implement them. Elara nodded, her expression resolute. I will prove it. The meeting adjourned soon after, but Elara could feel the weight of what had just transpired. Emery's opposition had been fierce, but for the first time, it seemed as though the elite were beginning to listen, not just to her, but to the people around them. As Elara made her way out of the grand hall, Dorian joined her. That was bold, he said, his voice low with admiration. But what now? They're still resistant. Elara glanced back toward the hall, her mind racing with possibilities. We move forward, she said, her voice calm but filled with determination. This is just the beginning. They won't change overnight, but with every step, the truth will come closer to the surface. Dorian nodded, a smile tugging at the corners of his lips. Then let's make them see it. The streets of Corvala were teeming with life, the city now pulsing with a different energy. The once stifling atmosphere had begun to shift. People walked with purpose, their faces filled with hope, as if a new dawn had broken over the city. But Elara knew that the battle was far from won. The elites had retreated into their shadows, but their opposition remained fierce. In the grand hall, the final council was set to convene. This was where it would all be decided. The future of Corvala would be shaped by the words spoken here today. As Elara walked through the imposing marble corridors of the council building, she felt the weight of the city's gaze upon her. It was not just her future at stake, but the future of everyone in Corvala. The council chamber was vast, the ceiling towering high above. The seats were filled with the wealthiest, most powerful figures in Corvala. Elara stepped into the room, her presence commanding immediate attention. Lord Darvish, now her ally, was seated at the head of the table. To his left, Emery sat with his arms crossed, his expression tight. The tension was thick in the air. We're gathered here today to discuss the future of our great city, Lord Darvish began, his voice echoing in the chamber, and to hear the final arguments regarding Elara's vision for change. Emery's voice interrupted, dripping with sarcasm. A vision that will destroy everything we've worked for. Elara met his gaze, her voice steady. You've worked to preserve a system that is broken. I'm here to fix it. The room erupted into murmurs as Elara's words settled in. Emery stood, his face flushed with anger. You think that by dismantling everything we've built, you'll make Corvala stronger? You're a fool, he spat. But Elara did not flinch. I'm not here to destroy what you've built, she replied, her voice clear and unwavering. I'm here to help it grow, to turn this city into something greater. We can be both wealthy and wise, prosperous and just, but only if we work together, not against each other. Emery's lips twisted into a sneer. Your naivety is astounding. You have no idea how the world works. Elara's eyes narrowed. I know more than you think. A long silence followed Elara's words, and the council members shifted in their seats, clearly divided. Lord Darvish leaned forward, his voice grave. Perhaps it's time we hear from the people, he said, his tone suggesting that he had more than just a simple vote in mind. Elara's ideas may hold weight, but we must ensure that the changes we make are not only for the wealthy but for everyone. Elara's heart skipped a beat. This was her moment. She had fought for this opportunity, and now she had the chance to prove that her vision could work for all of Corvala. I've already seen what this city is capable of, she said, turning to the council. But I need your help. We need your help. Together we can create a city where no one is left behind. The council chamber was silent for what felt like an eternity. Then, slowly, the murmurs began again, quiet at first, but growing louder. Some council members nodded in agreement, while others continued to cast skeptical glances toward Elara. But the shift was undeniable. Perhaps we've been too focused on what we have, one of the council members said, a woman whose name Elara did not recognize. Maybe it's time we considered what we could give. Lord Darvish looked around the room, his gaze sweeping over the faces of those who had once been his staunchest allies. I believe Elara has made her case, he said, his voice firm. And I think it's time we do more than talk. It's time we act. The room fell silent once more, but this time, the silence was different. It was filled with the promise of change.